Hi everyone, my name's Louise and thank you very much for joining me for this lesson today. Today we are learning about energy resources. So if you've been learning about this at school, it's generally a kind of physics science topic. So what are resources? So we're going to start off with natural resources, and these are any kind of natural substance which are required or at least desired by humans for us to survive or to thrive. Different natural resources occur in different countries and they're not spread equally around the world. For example, obviously, we in the UK don't have any rainforests. So as a result, countries trade their natural resources to ensure that all the needs around the world can be met. So let's have a quick look at some. So for example, minerals and metals like iron, gold, copper, silicon, they're used as building materials and also in technology. So silicon, if you've ever heard of Silicon Valley in America, for example, silicon is a material that we use a lot now in computers, phones, cars, that kind of technology. Forests and rainforests, obviously we use the timber and medicines from there. Water, obviously for drinking, washing, we also use it to make energy. Animals we use for food, crops as well. So there's loads of different natural resources that we use to survive. Today, in particular, we're talking about energy resources. Energy resources are any of those natural resources which we can use to produce energy. And what do we use energy for? It's for heat and electricity. So heat kind of naturally from that energy, and electricity obviously we can convert into lots of different things, including back to heat. So we can use natural resources to make electrical energy and then use that electrical energy to make heat, as well as loads of other different types of energy like sound energy, for example, when we listen to music. So there are two different main types of energy resource. There's renewable resources and non-renewable resources. So non-renewable ones are things like oil, natural gas, coal, and these are what we've been using for most of history really, and especially since the Industrial Revolution. So they take millions of years to form, and they can't be replaced. Because they take so long to form, it would take millions more years for them to be created again. So they are a finite resource. There's only so much of these non-renewable energy resources, and they will run out. So that is a big problem with them. So we're now that we have such high electricity demands in society, we're using them up faster than they could ever be made. So they are, and it is a fact, going to run out. The other type of energy resource is renewable resources. So, like the name suggests, they can be easily replaced and they are not going to run out. So they're kind of endless, unlimited, and that's why we call them renewable. So obviously, lots of economies are trying to move towards these renewable resources because they're not going to run out. So, and these, for example, are the ones we're going to be focusing on today. Things like wind power, wave power, solar, biofuel. There's lots of different types. So thinking about those non-renewable energy types, so things like coal, gas, oil, nuclear power. So there's three here, coal, gas and oil, which are known as fossil fuels, if you've ever heard of them before. So fossil fuels are definitely finite resources. They won't be around forever, and they're either not being made or they're being made extremely slowly. Nuclear power as well, not a fossil fuel, but it is considered a non-renewable energy source because there's only a certain amount of uranium, that's the thing that we need to make nuclear power. There's only a certain amount of uranium in the earth that can be used to make nuclear power. So it is finite, as in there's a fixed amount of it, so it's non-renewable. At the moment, about 3/4 of the electricity in the UK comes from power stations fueled by fossil fuels. So what we do, we burn these fuels, so we burn the oil, the coal or the gas. That heat is used to boil water. The water evaporates and turns into steam, and the steam turns turbines, and that kinetic energy, that movement, that's what kinetic energy is, generates the electricity. So, thinking about the pros and cons of non-renewable energy. In terms of pros, so the advantages, are that they're very efficient. in the sense that we can burn a very small amount of oil, gas or coal, or react a small amount of uranium for nuclear energy, and we get a lot of energy out. So in that sense, they're efficient. They're also convenient because we can use them whenever. We don't need to rely on environmental conditions, for example, that it be sunny or that there be lots of wind, and they can also be transported easily. So they're convenient in a number of ways. They're also relatively cheap way to generate electricity, and we already have the science we need, so they're cheap in that way already because we don't need to invest in creating new science. They're also well established, so we've been using fossil fuels for the best part of about 200 years, so we're very used to the infrastructure and to the ways we need to use our non-renewable energy resources. But obviously, there are big problems with them, otherwise we wouldn't be even having this presentation. So the cons of non-renewable energy resources. The big one at the moment, and especially if you've seen the recent announcement about climate change, the use of fossil fuels releases large amounts of carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and if you've ever heard of that term, it basically means that it causes the atmosphere to become warmer, and that's contributing to dangerous levels of global warming and climate change. So fossil fuels, non-renewable energy resources are big climate change problems. The second big con with them is that they also release pollutants into the environment. So not just carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas, they release other pollutants like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide, which both cause acid rain, which can harm sensitive ecosystems like our lakes, our forests. It can harm the wildlife there. So another big problem. Thirdly, the methods used to access fossil fuels like mining or drilling for coal can harm the environment in other ways. For example, you may have heard before about massive oil spills. That's when like a big oil tanker spills into the ocean and it can really devastate marine wildlife. And that's just one example. There's lots of ways which there can be harmful access method for finding these non-renewable energy resources. The other con, which isn't even on this slide, but you should be kind of thinking yourself from the first few slides, is that they're finite. They are going to run out. So if we're serious about stopping climate change, which we need to be to protect the earth, we need to find alternatives to these traditional non-renewable energy resources. So that brings us to our renewable energy resources. So we have an increasing energy demand in our society now. So people want bigger TVs, better smartphones, they want to fly further in airplanes. So then we need to look at different ways of producing energy which is sustainable, that we can keep up without running out and without doing further long-term irrevocable damage to the environment. So obviously the pros of these renewable energy resources is that they won't run out, we can reuse them again and again. They also don't release these harmful greenhouse gases. The problems with them so far, you might be asking, well, why are we not just changing like that to all these energy resources, is that it's much more complicated than creating energy from fossil fuels. We need new technology invested in it. For example, you need to develop the solar panels, you need to install them, buy them, and there are lots of countries in the world which just simply can't afford to do that right now. It's not a priority if they have other cheaper, accessible energy resources. So it's established countries, developed countries like here in the West where we need to be using these renewable energy resources. So let's have a look at some of them. So starting with wind energy. So these large windmills that you've probably seen before are called wind turbines, and they're built to harness the wind energy, the kinetic energy, the moving energy that we get from the wind. So when the wind blows, the blades move round and they spin a turbine connected to a generator which produces electricity. Pretty simple science-wise. They kind of work in the opposite way to a fan. So in a fan, we put the electricity in, we get movement out. A wind turbine, we put the movement in and we get electricity out. The problem with wind turbines, there's a couple of things. In order to create enough energy capable of powering thousands of homes, companies, we would really need to build a lot of large wind farms with loads of turbines. So that's a first problem. We need lots of these. That's solvable. We normally build them in windy places like in Scotland, or they can also be built out at sea where no one can even see them. And it's obviously very windy out there as well, because that is another problem. People sometimes complain that these ruin the look of the landscape when you look out. So that's another con of them. I personally think the existing power stations we have are also not very pretty, and that's not a good enough argument, but that is an argument that we have. The other thing about wind turbines is obviously if there's no wind, there's no electricity. The solution to this is to build them in places where we're pretty sure we have consistent wind power. So these are a good solution to energy problems in places in the world where it's super windy. Not good where we don't have wind. So let's look at some other solutions. We have solar energy. So the primary source of all energy on the earth comes from the sun. Plants get energy from the sun when they use photosynthesis. We eat the plant and we gain our energy. Everything on the world really gets their energy from the sun. And we've discovered that we can also use that solar energy to create electricity or heat directly. So we can either use the sun to make heat or electricity. So heat, they are called solar thermal panels. They're basically filled with water. The water gets heated up by the sunlight, and the heated water is then pumped through a tank, heating the water that's connected to your house. So you turn on your showers, have a nice warm shower. That might, if you live in the right kind of place, have been powered directly by solar energy. The other thing we can create by solar energy is electricity. So solar panels called photovoltaic cells are used to turn sunlight directly into electricity. They use that element silicon, which we've already spoken about. A great thing about these is that you might have seen in some buildings, they can be put on the roof of buildings and they don't even need to take up any extra space. The only problem really with them is that it can be difficult to generate a lot of electricity from these, so it can be expensive to meet the electricity demands that we have. They also obviously can't be harnessed in places where we don't have strong sunlight. So the UK is not the best contender for solar panels, whereas somewhere like California in America, great, they have kind of wall-to-wall sunshine. The next option we have is geothermal energy. When it's part of a word, geo, like geography, means earth, and thermal or therm, like thermometer, means heat. So geothermal energy is heat energy which comes from the earth. So basically, the science behind this, and we've got this picture to help us, it's always warmer underground than it is at the surface. But in some areas, like in Iceland and in New Zealand, if you dig just a few kilometres underground, it can be up to 70 degrees down there. So what they do is they pump cold water really far down underground, the water gets heated, and it comes back up as steam, turns a turbine, which turns a generator, and we get electricity. Again, here, you can just use it directly for the hot water, pump this hot water directly into people's homes, or you can use it and convert it into electricity. Obviously, the big problem with geothermal energy is we need these perfect conditions. We need the rocks to be very hot, not too far underground. Otherwise, it's super expensive to dig far enough down, and you just couldn't get it to work pumping the water. So actually, 85% of heating in Iceland and 25% of its electricity already do come from this geothermal energy. It's fortunate there because Iceland is a very volcanic country, so the rocks beneath its surface are very hot. But those conditions don't exist everywhere in the world. So again, we need other options. Next, we have hydroelectric energy. So hydro or hydra, when we put it into a word, means water. For example, dehydrated or hydrated. So hydroelectric power is a way of harnessing electricity from running water. So what we do, we build these big dams and we store loads of water at the top in a reservoir. Then, when we need electricity, we let the water run downhill, and that kinetic energy, that movement of the water, again, turns a turbine, powers a generator, creates electricity. So it's water flowing downwards. So this is really good in kind of mountainous regions like in Scotland or in northern Wales, where we've already got the steep hills made and we can just use them, make a reservoir at the top and use that to power the water down through the already existing power of gravity. Hydroelectric power is really good because it's more reliable than wind or solar power. We don't need to wait until it's windy or until we have sun. We just generally need there to be enough water which comes from the rain. But obviously, if we're in a very rainy place like Scotland or Wales, we're doing okay. These dams are expensive to build, which is another con of them. And another problem is that it affects the ecosystem in the local area if we build a huge reservoir here, because these things are really big, so they can badly affect fish migration patterns, and it can be difficult to find a suitable site. Basically, I hope you're getting the picture so far that none of these solutions are perfect, but what is going to be the way forward is a mixture of all of them. And depending on the local climate, depending on the conditions in that place, we choose which of them are going to work best, and we kind of do the best that we can using these renewable energy resources. At the moment, the UK generates about 1.5% of its electricity from hydroelectric schemes. Most of this comes from the Scottish Highlands. The next option, the final option that we're going to talk about today, there are others like wave power that we haven't spoken about, but the final one today is biofuel. So bio, in a word, means living things. So for example, biology. So biomass is plant and animal matter like wood, straw, sewage, waste food, and what we can do is we can burn this biomass. So we can burn the sewage or the waste food and it produces heat and we can turn that into electricity. So they're similar to fossil fuels, the way that we burn them and it makes heat, but because they're made from plants grown today rather than plants grown millions of years ago and fossilized to make fossil fuels, they can be made quickly, so they are renewable energies. The problem with these biofuels at the moment is they're not actually carbon neutral. So carbon neutral means basically we're not putting out more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. When they are burnt, they do give off some carbon dioxide, and fossil fuels are also used in the production of these biofuels, for example, in making fertilizers and fueling farm equipment. So we can't say that they're currently carbon neutral, but they do still release less CO2 than burning fossil fuels directly. We do also have another problem with these biofuels, and it's the ethical issues of using them. For example, crops that could be used to feed people when we currently do have world hunger issues are being used to provide the raw materials for biofuels instead. So there's this dilemma about how do we prioritise these resources that we have. So that brings us to the end of all our renewable energy resource options. And as I was saying earlier, really the way forward is going to be that we don't really have much choice if we want to stop climate change. We have to move away from those non-renewable fossil fuel resources and come to the world of renewable energy. And you might have seen in the news, there's investing money in the science behind them, but currently more needs to be done. So do some research yourselves if you're interested in this. It's super important. It's going to affect all of our lives in the coming years. So I hope you've learned something today. I hope you've enjoyed it. And thank you very much for watching. Thank you. Bye.